I pulled the landscape mode off once again. Sometimes we have difficulty with that. Difficulty as in me forgetting that if I don't put the phone in landscape mode before I hit go live, that it's going to be stuck in portrait mode for the whole time. And then I've got to adjust how the tripod, how the phone sits on the tripod. So the first order of operation was successful. So I'm pretty happy about that. Hope everybody is having a good Tuesday, a good week, and I hope you guys had a good weekend. Definitely looking forward to talking some boxing right now. There's actually a lot of interesting boxing news. Some good fights coming up. I would say that in terms of the fight that's taking place this weekend, this isn't one of the bigger fights. It's a high quality fight, but it's not a blockbuster or anything near that. Ventru, what's going on? Thanks for coming through. Hope you're having a good week, and I hope you had a good weekend as well. Yeah, I was explaining that this upcoming fight, that's taking place this weekend, isn't necessarily one of the biggest blockbuster types of fights, but it is shaping up to be a good one, and that is between Jojo Gonzalez and Isaac Dogboe. And aside from that, there's just a lot of other news that I'm going to get through. So some of the stuff that we're going to cover today. TJ, what's going on? Thanks for coming through. Heck yeah. Can't wait to talk boxing with you guys. Yeah, Hot Fast with Robert Reese. What's going on? Yeah, we just had our inaugural episode last Wednesday. Looking forward to doing another. But yeah, this coming weekend is Jojo Gonzalez versus Isaac Dogboe. Again, not a blockbuster fight, but this is a high-quality fight between one contender at featherweight in Jojo Gonzalez and then a former 122-pound champion in Isaac Dogboe. That's taking place this weekend. I just dropped a preview for that this morning, but we'll talk a little bit about that today. Also going to talk about some new breaking news, and that is that the WBA orders Triple G versus Erislandy Lara. They're basically looking to clean up the conflicting titles that they have at 160, how they have and I see that on a screen. I'm frozen on the screen that I'm watching. Let me know if you're seeing a frozen screen as well. I'm going to place this into the chat to ask you guys, just in case you're unable to hear me. But I just want to see if I'm on mute. One second. Good looking out. Thank you, Hot Fast with Robert Reese. Yeah, okay. Yeah, because I was looking, I try to keep the screen up so that I see if there is a malfunction, then I'm at least able to see that on another screen. So I'm frozen on one screen. I just wanted to make sure that I'm not frozen with you guys. Yeah, so Gabe Flores, Giovanni Cabrera, that is an interesting one. And yeah, you know, I should do a breakdown of that. So here's the thing, right? Because there's the fight calendar, right? I need to find a way to maybe not do a full preview on every fight that I do a preview on, right? Maybe just do the either the marquee matchup or whatever the 2 or 3 biggest fights of that weekend are going to be. Maybe do a full preview on that, and then find a way to do a shorter but still interesting breakdown of some of the undercard fights. I would like to find a way to pull both of those off, right? Because I don't think every fight needs to be a fully fledged preview, but I would like to weigh in on some of the fights that I haven't been able to get to doing the previews in the way that I've been doing them. So yeah, that's actually a good suggestion, and that would be a good fight to pilot something like that on. I saw Erislandy Lara is trash at 160. So okay, I would say he's unproven at 160. He beat O'Sullivan, and then he beat Cornflake, right? Cornflake Lamana. So he hasn't fought good fighters at 160 yet. And the fact that he's about 40 years old is really going to make us skeptical of the success that he would have against the top 5 or top 8 in the division. So how do you guys think that he would do right now against Triple G? Because again, the WBA just ordered Triple G. So when Triple G wraps up his fight with Canelo taking place in September, he basically has 120 days to schedule the fight, the title defense against Arislandi Lara. So I think Triple G, well, okay, I think it depends on how that fight turns out. I think if that fight is a complete disaster, who knows, Triple G might retire after this fight with Canelo. I wouldn't expect him to be willing to fight other, top contenders at 160. I mean, he doesn't seem like he has an appetite to fight people who wouldn't give him a huge check, even though, to his credit, he has fought Steve Rolls, Derevianchenko, and he unified the titles with Murata, and he fought Cesar Meta. But the Cesar Meta and Steve Rolls, those were more or less tune-up fights, right? Whereas if he's fighting Arislandi Lara, this is a guy, now we don't know how this fight's going to play out. We don't know, again, to your guys' commentary, how good Lara is at 160. But Lara is at least conceivably somebody who could pull off a win against Golovkin. If it's, say, 80% of prime Arislandi Lara. Now, some might even be skeptical about that. Even if Lara was 100%, some would think, oh no, there's still no way in hell that he beats a fighter the caliber of Triple G. But yeah, Triple G's a very dangerous fight for Lara at 160. To go from, fighting Cornflake LaManna to Gary O'Sullivan to then Triple G, those are going to be your 160. That's going to be your trajectory at 160. It's dangerous business, but I think that it matters to Arislandi Lara's career that he holds a title in a second division. I think that would just do a lot for his legacy. You're right. Yeah, he didn't beat Jarrett Hurd, a pressure fighter who's not as good as Triple G. And, Lara wasn't an old man at that point. He was getting into his mid-30s, but he wasn't old. And, yeah, he had a hell of a fight. It was a great competitive fight, a fight which, Lara looked like he was definitely having his moments, and it was really coming down to the wire. And the difference, really, in that fight was that late knockdown for Jarrett Hurd that kind of, sealed the deal. Cash out fight for not for Triple G, but for Lara. Yeah, it could very well be. And he's kind of lucked up in that WBA chose to enforce this particular title defense, because sometimes we'll see the sanctioning bodies kind of sit on their hands and not really do anything to clean up a mess where there are conflicting titles within the same division. But in this case, it looks like they are a bit more heavy-handed, as they have been, to their credit, over the past, 2 years. They started to say that they were going to clean up some of those conflicting titles. But yeah, I'm pretty pleased that this is the route that the WBA is taking here. Now, would Arislandi Lara be the fighter that I want to see Triple G defend that belt against? No, but it's better than no enforcement at all, I think. Let's see. Yeah, so Venture asked, is the WBA cleaning out the regular belt in all divisions? So I think they're slowly getting to the other divisions, because we saw them enforce it in certain divisions, like at 147, right? There were conflicting title holders at welterweight, where they were even having a tournament, or they were going to have a tournament that featured like Stanionis and Butayev to see who comes out with the lesser version of the WBA belt. I think that at a point, who was it? Was it Jamal James that was fighting Butayev for a lesser belt? I don't know if he's still holding a lesser belt in that division. So maybe they didn't clean it up at 147. But I'm trying to think of the division where they did successfully clean up the conflicting titles. But, in more news, kind of along the same path, is that the WBA, same sanctioning body, also just ordered Leo Santa Cruz versus Lee Wood. So this would clean up Leo Santa Cruz being a super champion at featherweight versus Lee Wood, who defended the title that he won from Zhu Khan, defended it in what I consider to be the fight of the year so far in 2022 against Michael Conlan. That was a brutal fight, action-packed. That one was pretty crazy. So they actually enforced a consolidation of the titles at 126 between the legend Leo Santa Cruz and Lee Wood. Leo Santa Cruz has not competed at featherweight since February of 2019. So I think it's a fair question to even ask. How the hell is he still holding a belt at 126 if he's been fighting at basically 130 since February of 2019? So Santa Cruz is now, again, scheduled to fight, well, not scheduled to fight, but ordered to fight Lee Wood. I think that would actually be a very interesting and competitive fight. So, yeah, and TJ, yeah, that's what Santa Cruz was trying to do. He actually petitioned the WBA to, instead of cleaning up the belt situation against Lee Wood, he was trying to get a clearance to fight Ray Vargas for Ray Vargas's 126-pound WBC belt. But the WBA instead said, nope, you've got to clean this up against Lee Wood. So that's pretty much how that has shaken out to this point. Now, sometimes you could pay a fighter step aside money, and sometimes the sanctioning body is down with that. But I don't think there's enough money in the pot here at 126 for that to be a viable option. So, I'm not mad at this fight. I have been enjoying Lee Wood fights. Now, Lee Wood back in the day lost to, I want to say, Jazza Dickens. He's got a couple losses earlier in his career, but he's really become sort of a late bloomer in terms of being a very good fighter. I'm going to stop short of calling Lee Wood a great fighter, but a very good fighter. And at this stage of Leo Santa Cruz's career, I don't know that he still beats Lee Wood. A couple years ago, this would have been a no-brainer. But I don't know if Leo Santa Cruz in 2022 still beats a Lee Wood. So yeah, they denied Santa Cruz the petition to fight Ray Vargas, which would have, by the way, been an easier fight to make since both Santa Cruz and Vargas are on PBC. I don't know how the promotional bodies are going to work out. It's probably going to head to like a purse bid or something like that, because Lee Wood generally fights on DAZN, whereas Santa Cruz, again, fights on PBC, Showtime, Fox. So, if Santa Cruz, by the way, doesn't comply and doesn't agree to fight Lee Wood, he would then vacate his super champ status, and then Lee Wood would be elevated to super champ, which, wouldn't you rather have it where they just clean up and just disregard that super title and just call it the WBA featherweight championship? So either way, Santa Cruz would no longer have any stake as a title holder at featherweight, and Lee Wood would be elevated to actual champion, which it's kind of whack, because the super champ gets to pick and choose and do what he wants, doesn't necessarily have to defend his super champ title, whereas the regular champ, in this case Lee Wood, has had to be on a schedule more or less and defend that title. The same thing was kind of taking place with Devin Haney and his repeated title defenses when he was a lesser WBC belt holder at 135 before he unified them against George Kambosos. Yeah, I'd be curious to see what those odds are, TJ. Who do you think would be favored right now between Santa Cruz and Lee Wood? I would think it would be Santa Cruz, but I don't know. Sometimes when somebody has been inactive, the market, the betting lines kind of reflect that. So I think Santa Cruz would be a slight favorite, but I think it would be a very slight favorite, given what we've gotten out of Lee Wood in his last two fights. So, yeah, the WBA basically got active on both of those fronts. Triple G now having to defend against Erislandy Lara, and then Santa Cruz having to fight Lee Wood. Yeah, Hot Fast with Robert Reed said, I would love to see Garcia versus Santa Cruz at 130. So when you say Garcia, are you talking Ryan Garcia? Because I don't see Ryan Garcia going below 135. In fact, Ryan Garcia, after beating Javier Fortuna, which we'll also get to, said that he will never fight at one. He's done with 135. Now, I think there was some posturing there. I think under the right circumstances, Ryan would get down. But check this out. Ryan Garcia is not only like a 5'11" guy, which it's hard to, it's hard to get to stay at 135. I think what has been difficult for Ryan Garcia. Not only was his last fight against Javier Fortuna at 140, but his fight before that against Emmanuel Tego I believe was 140. I'm going to double check that. But yeah, I think Ryan Garcia versus Tego was also at 140. So that would mean that the last time Ryan Garcia, again, a young 20s, but a growing kid, right? 23 years old now. The last time he fought at 135 and made that weight would have been at the beginning of last year. So a year and a half ago when he fought Luke Campbell would be the last time he properly fought at 135. Growth through calisthenics. What's going on? Thank you for coming through. Heck yeah. Yeah, I agree, TJ. I agree. Yeah, I think he's too big for 135, let alone 130. Plus, the fact that Santa Cruz is an aging fighter who would be coming up to meet Ryan Garcia. I don't see that being a viable fight for Santa Cruz. He's a volume guy who gets hit a lot. And that's one thing you don't want to do against Ryan Garcia is get hit a lot, right? And Santa Cruz, I mean, he fought competitively with Gervonta Davis. And Santa Cruz, and that was at 130. And to be honest, even 130 has felt like a bridge too far where Santa Cruz is still a good competitive fighter. He fought who else? Was it Miguel Vasquez Flores? That was his only other, no, he's fought, his most recent fight was at 130. Basically his last like his last three fights were at 130 and he was 126 before that. But, you know, Santa Cruz had his best days at 122 and even at 118. When he was 126, he was getting bigger money fights like those showdowns against Carl Frampton and Abner Mares. But I don't think he was at his most dominant, even at 126. So him going up to one, you know, staying up at 130, and then Ryan Garcia coming down to a weight that I don't think he can even make. I don't see that as being the play. But Santa Cruz, you know, I wanted to see Santa Cruz fight Gary Russell Jr., Ray Vargas earlier. So, yeah, you know, Santa Cruz versus Ray Vargas, that one still intrigues me. But even Santa Cruz versus a very exciting Lee Wood, I'm not mad at that fight either. But, yeah, let's talk a little Ryan Garcia since we're on the topic. I mean, look, I know we had varying opinions on how this fight was going to go down. Let me know in the comments if you thought that Ryan Garcia was more or less going to dominate Javier Fortuna, whether you thought he was going to knock him out or go to the scorecards. But when they stepped in the ring against one another, first of all, the height discrepancy was very evident. And, you know, I knew that Javier Fortuna was going to have to jump in and jump out. Basically, in the words of the great Nassim Richardson, swim without getting wet, right? Jump into the pocket, throw your punches, get out of harm's way. I didn't think that he was just going to be stuck on the other end of Ryan Garcia's jab, but even more surprisingly, his straight right-hand lead. And I talked a little bit about this in the post-fight recap. But he was throwing this right hand that was so quick and sudden, and he wasn't going head over skis to throw the punch. And the fact that Javier Fortuna, now he has aging legs, right? Fortuna is now, you know, 33 years old. I think he might have just turned 34. He's 33 or 34. But the fact that his legs weren't able to keep him out of harm's way and then be able to engage Ryan Garcia without getting tagged by either the jab or the straight right hand, I wasn't expecting that. I thought that Fortuna would be able to navigate a little bit better throughout the first half of the fight and at least land some clean shots. It seems like it feels like you could count on one hand the significant shots that Fortuna was able to land on Ryan Garcia. So Garcia does keep his chin out there, and that's been a major criticism of him. But to his credit, he's at least fighting tall against shorter fighters. So you don't want to sell out with the right hand to where your feet are out of position to where you could get countered. So I thought in throwing his repeated right hand lead, he was doing a very good job at that. And I wasn't expecting him to be able to land that so consistently. So Garcia KO. Yeah, it says TJ. Let's see. Yeah, that jab and the hook. Yeah. And the left hook is something that Ryan Garcia throws automatically. And when he was throwing it so repeatedly in the first round, I thought that he was a little too left hook happy, because it seemed like there was a point in the fight, early in the fight, again, first round, where Ryan Garcia would just throw a left hook. And then he'd follow it up with another left hook. And then another left hook. I'm like, okay, damn, like there's no surprise element to it. But if Javier Fortuna is not making you pay for throwing it, then I could see why you would like double and triple up on that left hook if you're able to throw it without consequence. Yeah, Ventru, I agree. So Ryan Garcia wants to campaign at 140 now. That's what he's basically saying. And again, he's fought 140 for his last couple fights now. So, and this is going to get into another topic that I want to discuss here, which is how should we look at fighters and their respective divisions? Because when we think, okay, Ryan Garcia at 140, then we start naturally thinking about, well, who are the top guys at 140? Well, you've got Josh Taylor's the head honcho there, even though he's now relinquished 2 out of his 4 belts. But then you've also got Jose Ramirez. You have Jose Zepeda. You have Montana Love, even though he didn't look great in his last win. Regis Prograis. But then you have to take into consideration, well, what are the different promotional bodies that are representing these different fighters? And then that cuts the field in half in terms of the potential fights that could be made. Because unless it's a huge blockbuster fight, like Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder, you don't see the cross-promotional efforts being made to get these good fights done with fighters from different promotional groups. Yeah, Cess 707. Regis, yeah, I agree. One of the best fighters at 140. He just can't secure a meaningful fight to save his life. And, I think that this is a case of him going independent as opposed to staying with a sanctioning body, kind of backfiring on him. It seems like a good move strategically, business-wise, because theoretically you should be able to negotiate your stuff and get paid more per fight. And in some cases, you see something like that work out for a fighter. But then in other cases, like in the case of Mikey Garcia, although, again, I think that he did get paid well since going independent, Regis Prograis is now with Pro Bellum, I believe, which I think that they're still on the fence because of all the Daniel Kinahan stuff, right? And the MTK Global getting shut down and Pro Bellum's supposed relationship with MTK. So Regis Prograis' career has kind of been at a stall point for the past, couple years. The fights that he has had haven't been meaningful ones either. So when we start, kind of hypothesizing or fantasizing about what's possible with Ryan Garcia fighting up at 140, you've got to cut the field in half based on who can Golden Boy and DAZN match Ryan Garcia up with. Is it going to be Ryan Garcia versus Jose Zepeda and then Bob Arum and Oscar De La Hoya work together to get that fight done? I don't think there's enough money in the pot for, even though it's a Ryan Garcia fight, for the promotional bodies to play nice and to work things out. Now, in these cases, I think that it's on Oscar De La Hoya, Golden Boy, even if you have the star fighter, to kind of make concessions if you don't have anybody within your stable to make a compelling fight with your guy on. That's why it kind of pissed me off when he basically said for Jamal Charlo versus Jaime Munguia to get done, that DAZN has to be involved. Now, what he's saying that is you either have to pay the network to step aside, or this fight has to be broadcast, at least co-broadcast, on DAZN. So the other network often wouldn't be down with that, which kind of makes me think that Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Davis won't happen next, because some network has to either step aside or they have to make this a joint pay-per-view. Hey, Stan Tucker, a.k.a. Dad, in the house. What's going on? So, yeah, with Ryan Garcia, it's exciting to think about the different 140 guys. If Ryan Garcia is, in fact, done with 135, then you would have to think, okay, Josh Taylor, no, that would require top-ranked Bob Arum's, cooperation. Jose Ramirez, no, same thing, top rank. Zepeda, top rank. Jack Catterall, right? He fought on ESPN in his last fight, and I think he's with Pro Bellum as well, like Regis Prograis. So maybe you could get something done with Prograis or something done with Jack Catterall. But it looks like if Josh Taylor gets his way, he's going to be fighting Jack Catterall. So the question then is, Ryan Garcia, if he doesn't get, Jesus, what's going on? Thanks for coming through. If Ryan Garcia doesn't get Gervonta Davis next, and what did he say? If he doesn't get Gervonta Davis, then he wants Teofimo Lopez, who is also with Top Rank, and he's about to have his 140-pound debut against Pedro Campa. So if Ryan Garcia doesn't get Gervonta Davis and doesn't get Teofimo Lopez because they can't work things out with Bob Arum, does Ryan Garcia want to fight Regis Prograis, somebody who's not as big a name as Gervonta Davis, so you're not going to get paid as much? Not as big a name as Teofimo Lopez, so you're not going to get paid as much. Does Ryan Garcia want to take that risk in fighting somebody as good as Regis Prograis, or is Regis Prograis more or less going to get sidestepped like a Demetrius Andre, where it's like, ooh, the risk is not worth the reward, or vice versa? Yeah, you're right. He also did mention Lomachenko, which that would also require Golden Boy to work with Bob Arum Top Rank. I don't have a lot of faith, unfortunately, in these promoters working together in fights that don't involve absolute bona fide pay-per-view numbers. Now, Ryan Garcia versus Lomachenko, that could be a pay-per-view number. I could see that potentially happening if Bob Arum is down and if Golden Boy is but they would have to still work it out with the network. Does Bob Arum go to ESPN and say, hey guys, I know you guys are funding my operation basically, but I'm gonna request that I take Lomachenko elsewhere? Is ESPN and Disney, are they gonna be down with that? Because as it stands, if you kind of see the level of promotion that's going in from the platforms, ESPN has kind of been treating boxing like a stepchild. Like, they haven't been given a lot of love. Like, even if you go to the ESPN app on a day where there's boxing taking place, a Top Rank card taking place, you always see that in terms of visibility on the app and where the thumbnail image is placed in the ESPN queue, you see that, for instance, UFC gets preferential treatment over boxing. Soccer gets preferential treatment over boxing. So I don't think that Bob Arum, and boxing are held in high esteem over at ESPN. So who knows? Maybe they say, yeah, screw it, go do what you want. We don't care anyway. But if that's not the case, if that's not ESPN's stance, then I think that he's going to have to involve ESPN in the promotion, right? So in that case, will Oscar take his golden goose and go to DAZN, who is kind of platforming his operation, and go to DAZN and say, hey guys, I'm going to take my cash cow and your cash cow in terms of this relationship. I'm going to have to take him over to ESPN for this fight with Lomachenko. I just don't see DAZN being down with that. So they're going to have to fatten the pot and make that a very lucrative fight. Bob Arum is very frugal when it comes to a lot of fights. We see that in a lot of the negotiations. And Oscar De La Hoya is very territorial in terms of how he's been handling his fighters and his relationship with DAZN. So I don't see that as being an easy fight to make. As much as we love to see Ryan Garcia, come on, Ryan Garcia versus Lomachenko, of course. And then, however skeptical we are that Ryan Garcia versus Lomachenko gets made, I feel even worse about the possible negotiations between Golden Boy and DAZN and, Gervonta Davis and Al Heyman, PBC, Steven Espinoza, and Showtime, and so forth. It sounds like everybody's already kind of staking their claim and saying, well, for this to happen, we have to be involved. Or for this to happen, somebody's going to have to relinquish their platforming rights. I just see both of those situations as being tough. So if neither one of those happen, and if Teofimo Lopez doesn't happen, I'm just thinking, what would be next for Ryan Garcia? Unfortunately, like, if I had to bet today, I'm not going to like this. I think that it would be Ryan Garcia versus Joseph Jojo Diaz. It's an easy fight to make. Jojo Diaz seems to want to fight anybody who's down to fight him. The bigger the name, the better. And Ryan Garcia, I don't think that Ryan Garcia doesn't want to fight difficult fighters. I know I was talking with y'all a little bit earlier today, and I think it might have been. Hey, my bad. And I think one of you guys, I think it might have been TJ, said I don't see Ryan Garcia wanting to fight Teofimo Lopez. I'm sorry, Gervonta Davis, but I think that he wants to fight Gervonta Davis. I really do. I think that he, in his heart, wants to smoke. I don't think you get into this profession, get to where he has now gotten without having a burning desire to want to be the best. So I really don't think it's on him. I really think that it's Oscar De La Hoya protecting his investments. That's what I think is the biggest thing at play. Same thing with Mayweather Promotions and Gervonta Davis, protecting their investments. And for it to be worth it, to match them up against somebody from another network, it either has to be something that's near the level of like Mayweather Pacquiao, which like nothing has ever been, but it's got to be like a super duper fight where everybody gets paid enough to be happy. And then, and then you're willing to, then the reward is worth the risk. But if it's not that situation, it's just tough to make. But yeah, I think that it would probably be Ryan Garcia versus Jojo Diaz because they're both with Golden Boy. Hey, Jay Foreman, what's going on? Thanks for coming through. Heck yeah. Yeah, exactly. Oscar the fighter and Oscar the promoter. Yeah, no, I got what you were saying. Yeah, I got what you were saying. I got what you meant with that one. Oscar, the promoter versus Oscar the fighter. Very different philosophies. Oscar the fighter wanted to fight the biggest and the baddest. Oscar, I don't know if it's because of financial issues. I don't know. There's always reports that you're hearing about Oscar's, from his personal life to the finances of Golden Boy, because let's keep it real. Compared to like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when Golden Boy was like the biggest name in the game, like you could argue they were bigger than Top Rank, right? They were bigger than, there wasn't a PBC at the time. Golden Boy had it going on. They had Shane Mosley, they had Bernard Hopkins, they had Oscar De La Hoya, obviously. Even when Mayweather Promotions was getting off the ground, when he was still with HBO, it wasn't until Floyd broke with Showtime that Mayweather left Golden Boy. Because before that, they were all doing the co-promotional thing. It seems like we are far, removed from that Golden Boy Promotions heyday. Yes, they did have their Canelo era, and having Canelo kind of lengthened the visibility of Golden Boy Promotions, right? But now it seems like Golden Boy is almost run like a kind of like a mom and pop shop, like a boutique style enterprise versus like, Matchroom right now. I would have to say Matchroom is pretty much the biggest outfit there is, right? I remember being very skeptical when the best guy Eddie Hearn had a few years ago was Kell Brook. I was thinking, oh man, Matchroom's not going to make that huge of a dent. Here we are a few years later, and I think that Matchroom has perhaps maybe taken a slight lead on Top Rank and PBC. I don't know. It's up for debate, certainly. But Golden Boy today seems a lot more protective and less willing to make the fights that matter. Whether you're talking about Jaime Munguia, Virgil Ortiz, at least at this point, and that's going to be something worth keeping your eye on too, how they're going to manage his career, because the same things apply in terms of who do we want to see Virgil Ortiz fight? Stanionis, Boots Ennis, Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence, winner or loser, right? We want to see Virgil Ortiz fighting some of the best at 147. It's slim pickings over there at Golden Boy. And even if you include Eddie Hearn and, they have Conor Benn and a couple of others lesser, that aren't as popular as Conor Benn, but it's slim pickings. It's going to be interesting to see how they navigate that. By the way, in some other Golden Boy news, did you guys see the current minimum weight and junior flyweight women's champion, very popular or increasing in popularity fighter, Senicia Estrada? We've seen her on Golden Boy. She does some of the commentary, as does Jessica McCaskill. But ever since beating Marlon Esparza, Senicia Estrada's reputation has grown. She just parted with Golden Boy. They made that announcement, I believe, yesterday. So, yeah, I was surprised to hear that. But, yeah, that's just another. And Golden Boy's representative came out and said, basically, she wanted too much money. So, yeah, they seem to be operating with a tighter belt. As does Top Rank, to be fair. But Top Rank just has so many more of the top upper echelon elite fighters in comparison to Golden Boy right now. They both seem like they're running on a tighter budget, but the amount of top tier talent that Top Rank has right now exceeds Golden Boy's. So every big name that Golden Boy loses, I mean, they lost Canelo and that was devastating. I was wondering how they were going to continue. Well, they found a way to, and it's because they still have a few very good fighters and still put on some quality shows. I also like Alexi Rocha on Golden Boy. He fought on that Ryan Garcia versus Javier Fortuna undercard. But yeah, there's a lot to discuss when it comes to Golden Boy and with Ryan Garcia and what the future holds. Because, yeah, as much as I want to see some of those dream matchups, we'll call them, that you guys want to see, the promotion, the politics in the game and the boxing economics just don't make it likely. You know, I actually put a poll out yesterday to ask you guys what you thought. Well, the question was, is Ryan Garcia's next fight gonna be against Gervonta Davis? And nearly like 70-something% of you guys, I think closer to 80% than 70%, like 76-78% of you guys said no. And I think like close to 30%, like 28% or something like high 20s, low 30s said yes. So as much sense as that fight makes, and as much as the boxing world is crying out for a fight like that, doesn't have to be that fight, but that's definitely one of the few fights that we want to see the most. It remains to be seen whether the politics allow for it. So, yeah, we'll keep an eye on it. And I'm going to stay optimistic. I hope that it happens, and I hope that it happens next. I would be very disappointed if it turns out that Ryan Garcia's next fight is against Joseph Jojo Diaz. Even if Jojo is a quality fighter. You know, I would have liked that fight, or at least been more interested in the fight before I saw this one-sided destruction that Ryan Garcia put on Javier Fortuna, because Jojo Diaz did recently beat Fortuna, but it was a very close and competitive fight. And maybe Jojo Diaz is more durable than Javier Fortuna, so maybe he could last more rounds. But I think that I've underestimated Ryan Garcia as being a good round winner, right? Because sometimes when you have huge power, the idea can be it's either feast or famine. You're either knocking them out or you might be losing the round. And when you talk about somebody who's got flaws in their game, like a lot of people say about Ryan Garcia, then you tend to say, well, then he's not as great a round winner as a Devin Haney, right? But seeing the way that he was able to dominate minute by minute over Javier Fortuna makes me think otherwise. Not to mention, he was winning most of those rounds against Luke Campbell before finishing him. So I think that we have to take another look at the totality of Ryan Garcia's skill set. Yes, he does keep his chin out, but like I said, he does also use his height and fight tall to where it looked like Fortuna needed to run in to get inside, basically, on Ryan Garcia. Otherwise, it was just those one-off haymakers that Javier Fortuna was trying to land a prayer with, right? So, and that speaks to what's possible if Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Davis does happen next. Because if he fights Tank, I suspect that in those non-eventful or less eventful rounds, as online boxing analyst Richard Dwyer calls them, the slow rounds, where somebody's not getting dropped or badly hurt, I tend to suspect that Ryan Garcia will be winning more rounds than he's losing against Tank Davis. You couple that, you couple the way that Ryan Garcia has been performing round after round against Fortuna and against Luke Campbell. We'll even throw the Emmanuel Tego one out. Fortuna and Luke Campbell. You take that round by round performance and then, couple that or juxtapose that with Gervonta Davis's round by round performances against Leo Santa Cruz, Mario Barrios. Granted, that was up at 140, but hell, I mean, Ryan Garcia is now kind of operating at 140. Granted, he was fighting a former featherweight title holder in Javier Fortuna, who had no business fighting up at 140, right? But, Ryan Garcia, I can see him growing into 140 better than I can see Gervonta Davis growing into 140, even if Gervonta Davis is more proven today at 140 than Ryan Garcia is, largely because of their physical frame, their build. He just allows for more weight to put on. But I think that Ryan Garcia would be winning majority of the rounds against Gervonta Davis, and it would have to be, and I think I was talking about this with Ventru earlier, I think that it would be that Gervonta Davis would need to do something big in that fight more than Ryan Garcia would need to do something big. I think that the intensity or we'll say the suspense and okay, any day now, come on, you're going to turn it around. I think it's going to be pointing at Gervonta Davis more than it's pointing at Ryan Garcia. I think Ryan Garcia would be more like, hey, if we could carry this pace and this style fight on throughout, I win by unanimous decision, 8 rounds to 4 or 7 rounds to 5 or something. Now, Gervonta Davis usually gets his big moment at some point along the fight, but I would have to think that Ryan Garcia's ability to win rounds will influence the betting odds if and when that fight is made. But also, I mean, Gervonta Davis's fight against Rolly Romero, same thing. Win some rounds, lose some rounds. Isaac Cruz, now granted, he was injured halfway into that fight, but same thing even in the early rounds, like the rounds 1 and 2. Win a round, lose a round, you know? So, yeah, this really makes Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Davis a lot more interesting in my book. Let me get to some of your guys' comments. Bronze Boy instead of Golden Boy. Jay Foreman said Bronze Boy. No, Ryan ain't fighting Tank next. But to be fair, Tank is also being protected. Yeah, I agree. Both promoters are protecting their investments, and that's why we're not seeing the cross-promotional efforts being made. And it's weird. PBC tends to pay their fighters more on average. Like, you know, they pay their Danny Garcias, for instance, higher than Bob Arum is paying his, you know, near elite fighters. It's interesting, and I remember seeing Eddie Hearn in some of the interviews, like saying, I wonder where PBC is even getting the money to pay these guys this much money. He's saying, I don't know how they're able to operate as a business as much as they're paying some of these fighters. Jose V, what's going on? Thanks for coming through. You think Ryan versus Tank is a competitive fight? Yes, I very much do. I wouldn't have said that a year ago or 2 years ago. But yeah, looking at both of their last 2 to 3 performances, I think it's a very competitive fight. I don't know who I would favor. You know, I was going to say, I see Benjamin Tucker, my cousin, what's up, Benji, is in the house. And I think I was going to say, we were talking about Tank Davis versus Ryan Garcia, and he was saying, I think Ryan Garcia gets him. But no, let me not misquote you, Benji. We were talking about Gervonta Davis versus Lomachenko, and you were saying Loma has his way with Gervonta Davis. But with Tank versus Ryan Garcia, I don't know who I would favor. A part of me still thinks that I would slightly favor Gervonta Davis, but this whole round winning thing, if it were to go to the scorecard, I would kind of like Ryan Garcia's chances. Now, I don't know if in a difficult fight, because we've seen Gervonta Davis in difficult fights where he had to come up big late in the fights, right? Like the fight against Mario Barrios. I don't know how Ryan Garcia would handle those deep waters where there's a lot of activity, because we've been seeing Ryan Garcia fight at his pace where he's not getting pressured a ton. When we saw him get pressured against Carlos Morales, go back and watch that fight. Ryan Garcia had a hell of a time. Now, granted, that was about 4 years ago now. I think that we're getting a different Ryan Garcia today than we were in that particular fight. But go rewatch Ryan Garcia versus Carlos Morales. But we've been seeing Ryan Garcia fight at a pace that he's comfortable with. Whether you're talking about his fight against Tego, Fortuna, a little bit less so Luke Campbell. Luke Campbell made him box minute by minute, where you've got to be active. But in these other fights, it almost looked like he was punching a moving heavy bag when he was fighting Fortuna, where when he wants to, he's throwing jab, 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 or, and I said this in the beginning of the hour, right hand lead, right hand lead, right hand lead, a steady diet of right hand leads, where my dad, he's in the house, Stan Tucker, when we were watching the fight, he was saying, why is Fortuna allowing Ryan Garcia to keep on throwing these unanswered right hand leads? And it's because he wasn't having to pay for them. The same reason he was able to throw one left hook after another after another. No, I'm sorry. You were asking why Fortuna was allowing Garcia to throw the right-hand lead. And I suspect it was out of fear of the check left hook if Fortuna were to jump into the pocket. But yeah, we've been seeing Ryan Garcia fight at his pace. I think Gervonta Davis, if nothing else, would make Ryan have to work harder in the early and middle rounds, to where if this fight does get into the later rounds, you will have both guys pretty damn tired, to where I'm not going to say a dogfight breaks out, but a highly intense boxing match breaks out where it's not just one-way traffic in the way that we've been getting one-way traffic in Ryan Garcia's last 2 fights. But yeah, that's a very competitive fight in my opinion. So Growth Through Calisthenics said, I think Tank is a better boxer than people give him credit for. You know, I agree with that as well, too. He's not feast or famine, even if we've seen him lose multiple rounds in several fights now, right? He's lost a few rounds in a few fights. But, yeah, his ability to not get hit flush is pretty good. His ability to win a fight against Isaac the Pitbull Cruz with one hand, essentially. To me, that was one of the most impressive things I've seen Gervonta Davis do. And that was like one of his very few fights that didn't result in a knockout. His ability he was losing some of those rounds, obviously, against Isaac Cruz, but his ability to not get, or Isaac Cruz, I'm sorry, to not get hurt against somebody who knows how to hurt you and be able to kind of fend you off with his movement and his lead right hand. I was very impressed by that. Not to mention the way that he boxed the much taller Mario Barrios, right? And he lost a few rounds in that one too. Let's see. Hot Fast with Robert Reed says, if Garcia stands and walks up front, how he does get hit hard and bad. So if Garcia stands and walks, it basically takes the same posture, right, against Tank Davis and starts trying to walk him down, that he gets blasted. Well, he would have to be very cognizant, and I'd imagine Ryan Garcia will be prepared to either throw the left hook when Davis jumps in or take a step back, right? Because that's what he was doing with Fortuna. Whenever Fortuna would even look like he's about to throw a punch, he would either have that left hand, cocked and on deck, ready to go, that hook, or he would take a step back, to which one step back would require Fortuna to take 2 steps in because of the stride differential, right? Garcia's 1 step back is about the same space occupied or space stepped as 2 Fortuna steps. So Fortuna just, he was too old to get his legs that busy to stay in once he got in. But even if he stayed in, I don't know how effective he would have been able to be given Garcia's punching power, even up close. Let's see. Ventru said to Growth Through Calisthenics, I think he has shown more boxing IQ in his last 2 fights. Yeah, in terms of Tank. Yeah, I agree with that. Benjamin Tucker says, because after all that, for each of their headline fights, we still don't know if either one is good. So, what's funny about that is that there is actually truth to it. Now, it depends on it depends on what you think of Javier Fortuna, what you think of Luke Campbell. Because, okay, Benji, I know you watch Paulie Malignaggi, right? Paulie Malignaggi says that Ryan Garcia's win over Luke Campbell, basically, Luke Campbell is the best opponent that either one of them has fought. That was what Paulie Malignaggi was saying. I respect Luke Campbell. Granted, he retired after that fight, which makes you wonder how close to his 100% best self was he when he was in there against Ryan Garcia. So that's a fair question. But in terms of just the overall quality of fighter, now you could say the same about Leo Santa Cruz, because. But I think what Paulie was saying was he thinks that the Luke Campbell that stepped in the ring against Ryan Garcia at 135 was a more credible opponent than Santa Cruz at 130 fighting Gervonta Davis. But you're right, they have been very crafty in how they are picking their opponents, right? And that's just the unfortunate part of the game. You want to keep the train on the tracks, mitigating the risk, collecting your rewards, fight over fight, not losing, right? Because everybody's scared to lose, or most fighters are scared to lose. Most promoters, more specifically, are scared to lose. So we're getting these types of matchups where you kind of have to squint to say, yeah, that's a good fight, right? So like if Ryan Garcia versus Jojo Diaz was made, where again, Jojo Diaz was at his best at 126, right? And then he went to 130, beat, Tevin Farmer, then blew weight against, before fighting Rakhimov, lost his belt, then moved up to 135. So if he fights Ryan Garcia, they might make that fight at 140. Who knows, right? So you would have to squint to say, Yeah, I can see how Ryan Garcia versus Jojo Diaz is a good fight. And that's unfortunately what we've been getting fight after fight, Tank Davis fighting Mario Barrios. First of all, the first question that most people asked was, who? And then you look into it. Oh, it's a 140 guy? Oh, who is he beating? Oh, no, nobody that good? And then you start squinting, and then it's like, okay, that's an interesting fight. So they've been having to get very creative with the matchmaking. Let's see. Same thing that they were doing early in Terrence Crawford's foray at 147, right? When they were fighting Jeff Horn, which was for a title. That's how Terrence Crawford earned his 147-pound WBO belt, beating Jeff Horn in his 147-pound debut. And then they matched him up against Jose Benavidez Jr., which we'll talk a little bit about him actually next week. But yeah, that was his second fight at 147, Jose Benavidez Jr. Then they got him to fight like Amir Khan. Just these interesting matchups where you have to squint and say, okay, even though because of Khan's talent level, I think we were at least kind of excited to see what was going to happen, how Terrence Crawford was going to handle the hand speed of Amir Khan. I know I was pretty excited about. I think that was one of the earliest videos I was doing, and I wasn't doing like weekly videos or anything, but I was doing just kind of one-offs a few years ago, and that was actually one of the fights that I was interested in covering. Cruz, Benjamin Tucker says Cruz was Gervonta Davis's best win performance. Yeah. I agree. The Barrios one I like. The Santa Cruz one, I mean, you can't argue with the devastation of that knockout. And then some people will still point to Gervonta Davis's win at 130 against then title holder Jose Pedraza. A lot of people were still pointing to that as perhaps being Gervonta Davis's best win. So there are a few good wins that you could choose from. Ryan Garcia has a couple that you could choose from. A couple things that I mentioned earlier, if you guys missed it, the WBA ordered Triple G versus Lara as Triple G's next title defense. So after Triple G, Canelo versus Triple G 3, Triple G would have to defend his WBA belt. He's also still, I believe he's still the IBF title holder as well. But he would have to defend it against Erislandy Lara after going to 168 to fight Canelo a third time. And the WBA also ordered Leo Santa Cruz, who is somehow still holding a super title at 126, even though his last time fighting at 126 was in early 2019, so like a whole year before the COVID pandemic. Leo Santa Cruz has been ordered by the WBA to consolidate the WBA title at 126 with the other belt holder of the WBA, Lee Wood, who we just saw fight Michael Conlon in what I see to be as probably the fight of the year so far in 2022. So the WBA is trying to get active in consolidating some of their conflicting titles. EK is in the house. What's going on, EK? EK had first said, will the outcome of Ryan versus Tank at 140 be any different than them fighting at 135, in your opinion? I think very possibly. I think fighting at 140 benefits Ryan Garcia. I think that if it's at 135, I think that's a little bit better for Tank's odds. And yeah, at 140, I think it's a little better for Ryan Garcia's odds. I'd imagine Ryan Garcia would look very big against Tank Davis if they were to do that one at 140. Because that would mean that he would be coming into the ring probably like at 148, 150 even, maybe even a little bit more. So, yeah, I definitely think that 135 favors Tank Davis. So, I also think that that was a negotiation ploy for Ryan Garcia to say, I'm done with 135. Yeah, Tank, if you want the smoke, come see me at 140. I think that that was him kind of negotiating early. Let's see. EK said Fortuna is a better fighter than Rolly Romero. Definitely a more accomplished fighter. If they were to fight today at 135, I would actually favor Rolly Romero today over Fortuna. But career-wise, I would say Fortuna's better than Rolly. And certainly when he was in the lower weight classes, better than Rolly. Again, he was at everywhere from 122, 126, 130, 135. He had no business at 140, and that's where he fought somebody who hits as hard as Ryan Garcia. at 5'10", 5'11". Ventru said, I think Campbell has been Ryan's biggest test. I agree, totally. Well, I don't think that was his most difficult fight. Even though he did get knocked to the canvas, I still think that the Carlos Morales fight might have been his most difficult fight. But in terms of his best fight and his best opponent and so forth, I would say Luke Campbell. EK says Ryan versus Richard Comey at 140 would be a good fight if no big names are next. So that would be Comey's first fight at 140, I believe, right? Now, Richard Comey, if I'm not mistaken, is currently on the schedule. He's going to be fighting somebody soon. If any of you guys know who Richard Comey is about to fight, let us know in the comments. I'm about to do a quick check, but I remember seeing Comey's name linked to an upcoming fight. And I think that it was still at 135, but I could be wrong there. But yeah, you know what? Versus Richard Comey, that would be a difficult fight for Ryan Garcia. Remember, Richard Comey was the first guy that Teofimo Lopez beat for a title. That was how he earned his IBF belt before then taking on Vasily Lomachenko for all the belts. And you know, to be fair, going into that Teofimo Lopez versus Comey, or at the time I think it might have even been billed as Comey versus Teofimo Lopez, you know, I was really curious as to how Teo was going to do against Richard Comey. Now, he ended up knocking him out spectacularly early, but going into the fight, I thought it was going to be a very competitive one, especially based on how Comey performed against, who was it, Carlos Beltran? He looked really good. I think it was Beltran. He knocked Beltran out, I want to say, with a nice right hand. But yeah, Comey's stock has definitely taken a hit after losing, you know, not only to Teo, but also the way he got beat down by Lomachenko. Very humbling experience, I'm sure. But yeah, Ryan Garcia says he's done with 140. But oh, one question for you guys in a sec. I want to get to a couple of your comments real quick. Jose V says, yeah, I agree. That fight is very intriguing. Yeah, Ryan's left hook is crazy good. And, you know, and I think that his straight right was looking really good against Fortuna as well. Yeah, Jay Foreman said, yo, I'm tired of squinting so damn much. Yeah, we as boxing fans, we've had to do a ton of squinting. It's just like I'm going to start squinting in a few days doing a Virgil Ortiz Jr. versus Michael McKinson breakdown. I'm going to do some serious squinting for that one. You know, this upcoming Joet Gonzalez versus Isaac Dogboe fight this weekend, that's actually not a squinting fight. Now, these aren't A-plus level fighters. Dogboe is a former title holder at 122, but this isn't that wouldn't be a squint fight, right? Squint fight is when it's a bit of a mismatch and you're trying to convince yourself otherwise. By the way, what happened with Virgil Ortiz Jr. versus David Avanesian? They were like about to announce that fight, and then they rescheduled Virgil Ortiz Jr. versus Michael McKinson. I wasn't happy about that news. EK says Triple G is going to retire after Canelo. Let's be real. I think that's a strong possibility. It's hard to imagine then 41-year-old maybe, or maybe still 40 by the time he's done with fighting Canelo, and then his fight after that, if he does defend his title against Erislandy Lara. It's hard to picture Triple G just fighting for the sake of fighting after his third fight with Canelo. I feel like this third fight with Canelo is kind of like his life mission statement at this point. I just don't see him getting up for too many matchups after that. It's just a shame that we never got him versus Jermall Charlo or versus Demetrius Andrade or versus Billy Joe Saunders. Let's see. EK says Shakur will probably beat Devin. You know, at this point, Devin, I can't say that. I think a lot of you guys might agree with that, and it's definitely possible. And Shakur Stevenson's been looking brilliant, but Devin Haney's been looking really good. And I never make light out of fighters going up a division, right? Shakur's now been a solid 130 for his last few fights now, and he's including his win over Nakathila, right? I mean, he beat Nakathila before Nakathila stopped Burchelt in Burchelt's last fight or most recent fight, hopefully his last fight, to be honest. But Nakathila, has got hammers, and Shakur Stevenson was able to handle him, handle Jamel Herring, Oscar Valdez. He's been looking great, but Devin Haney looks like he might be great too. So I don't know how that Shakur Stevenson Devin Haney fight would play out. I think that if it's Shakur Stevenson's first fight at 135, I would favor Haney. But if he gives himself a couple fights to get acclimated, maybe the odds even out, perhaps, depending on how he looks at 135. But to be honest, by then I would expect Devin Haney to go up to 140, because what I think is happening, and I think one of you guys might have mentioned this as well. I feel like when Devin Haney just won all of the belts, all of a sudden other fighters are starting to make plans at 140. So Ryan Garcia not only basically sidestepped Devin Haney when he was the mandatory for Haney's WBC belt at 135, but now when Devin Haney wins all of the belts, you're like, peace to like the whole division. Basically, because when Devin Haney then moves up to 140, as he inevitably will, it's almost like he's got to start back at the beginning. Because I don't think people are going to be getting in line to fight Devin Haney at 140. So it's almost like he's going to have to earn a belt, probably in a vacant title situation, to then get any other meaningful names to fight him. I mean, you could argue he still has yet to fight a top tier name. George Kambosos just happened to be the guy that beat Teofimo Lopez via huge upset. He wasn't a big name going into that fight. Or, people like, put it like this. Teofimo Lopez versus George Kambosos, before that fight happened, that was a squint type of fight to some degree, right? It just so happened Kambosos won the damn thing. Let's see. Jay Foreman said, I get that Garcia versus Davis fight would be hard to make. I would be satisfied with Michael Rivera or Raleigh. Why not Taylor at 140? So I don't think it's going to be Taylor at 140, because I don't see Bob, not Bob Arum. Well, yeah, that would still be Bob Arum. Taylor's still with Top Rank ESPN, right? Let me see if I have. I know he's been fighting on ESPN. I don't think he's split with Top Rank. So if he's still with Top Rank, first of all, I think he's probably going to fight Jack Catterall next for 2 of the 4 belts. Because remember, Taylor has had to relinquish 2 of those 4 belts. One for not fighting Albert Puello, who's about to be fighting for a vacant. No, not Puello. Somebody else at 140 who he was supposed to fight. It was a mandatory, and he dropped 1 belt and didn't want to fight them. And then he. Let me know who he was supposed to fight when he relinquished that first title. But the other one was supposed to be against Jose Zepeda. That was another mandatory that he didn't want to take because he wants that rematch with Jack Catterall. So I think he's going to be fighting Catterall next. But even if he wasn't going to be fighting Catterall, the difficulty still remains, where maybe there's enough money in the pot and you could convince Bob Arum to put, Josh Taylor in there with Golden Boy's Ryan Garcia. But again, I'm just super skeptical of these cross-promotional fights that aren't bona fide super fights. And by super fight, I mean both guys are like damn near A-listers. Like, to be frank, Tank Davis versus Ryan Garcia, or Ryan Garcia versus Tank Davis, however you want to list that. I think that is a possible super fight. Ryan Garcia versus Josh Taylor. As accomplished as Josh Taylor is, I still think that is a boxing fans Super Bowl. I think it's a boxing fans fight that we would love to see, but I think it would take telling the story well for the non-hardcore boxing fan to buy into, Ryan Garcia, Josh Taylor. You would have to explain to them, no, this Josh Taylor guy, he won all the belts at 140 and beat this guy and beat Regis Prograis, to which they would say, who? But, to us, it means something significant. So I would love to see Taylor versus Ryan Garcia, but I'm just skeptical as far as the promoters getting that done. In terms of Michael Rivera, I think that would be an interesting test. Michael Rivera is the guy who kind of looks like a young Cassius Clay. He's got the same, flat top. I forgot where he's from, but he's not from the U.S. Is he from the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico? If you know, let me know in the comments. But Michael Rivera has been looking pretty good in the, I think he's been looking good, not great, to be honest, but he does have a lot of skill. He's got decent punching power, very good boxing ability, but let me know if I went on mute for a second there. Check one, check one, check two. I think I might have muted for a second, but I might be back on track now. But Michael Rivera is the guy who looks like Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali. He's got that flat top, kind of a taller fighter. It would be an interesting test for Ryan Garcia. And I'd imagine that if Ryan Garcia goes to 140, that he's probably going to, he's going to tread lightly. Fight another, fight a guy or two that you're more or less certain that you could beat, and then fight a top name. What I don't like is when a top fighter, or when somebody as talented as a Ryan Garcia campaigns at a weight class and doesn't end up fighting any of the fights that matter the most, and then goes on to the next weight class, right? We see that, pretty often, where a guy is done with a weight class with so much unfinished business in that division. I hope we don't get that with Ryan Garcia, but if you believe the rhetoric in him saying that he's done with 135, that might indeed be what we get. What do you guys think about Conor Benn versus Chris Eubank Jr.? It's possible. That's kind of a weird fight, right? I get it, because their dads fought a legendary fight, especially if you were in the UK or a British, boxing fan. Nigel Benn versus Chris Eubank, that fight mattered a ton. Conor Benn fights at 147, and this is what I mean with the matchmaking for Conor Benn, because the stable is so thin at Matchroom at 147, where they're having to get creative and fight, and have him fight basically somebody who's been fighting their whole career at or most of their career at 160 and 168. Chris Eubank Jr.'s 2 losses came against Billy Joe Saunders and against George Groves. So it's like, what the hell would he be doing fighting a Conor Benn? I like Conor Benn. I truly want to see Conor Benn's career take the natural trajectory of working up, which he's been doing, fighting slightly better fighters, Adrian Granados, Samuel Vargas, Chris Algieri. But I want him to be fighting very good 147 pounders, very good welterweights. The problem is, when you kind of become a celebrity, which he is in the UK, it's like the carriage before the horse. You are famous before you are accomplished. So it's hard to picture somebody really working through the rigors of fighting the hardcores. Like what do we want? What would we? I want to see Conor Benn fight like Stanionis on PBC. He's the guy who just beat Butayev. What is he? Lithuanian? Is he Lithuanian? I think he's Lithuanian. Yeah. But I want to see Conor Benn fight somebody like that caliber. There's no chance in hell that we're going to get that. We would get a pay-per-view instead, because they are going to make it a pay-per-view, at least on in the UK. It's probably going to be on DAZN here. Who knows? They might try to pitch it as here being the US. That's where I am. They might try to pitch it as a pay-per-view here as well. But yeah, it's just a weird fight. And it's like, I guess I like it. I like Chris Eubank Jr., but I want to see Chris Eubank Jr. fight the best at 160 and 168. I don't love it, but sure, whatever. If you can't find anything more exciting to do with Conor Benn, I guess so. LTAMTC, what's going on? Thanks for coming through. Yeah, Conor Benn should be fighting the David Evanesian. And that's what I was thinking when they announced that Virgil Ortiz Jr. might be fighting David Evanesian. Evanesian kind of slowed up the Josh Kelly hype train. Josh Kelly was kind of a hype fighter in the UK. It's kind of a slick style. And David Evanesian took it to him. David Evanesian also was Shane Mosley's last fight. Young David Evanesian at the time. And I remember Lamont Peterson after that beating up on, and he didn't stop him, but he beat him via big, wide, unanimous decision. Lamont Peterson beat David Evanesian, but Evanesian is a really good fighter, and that would be a perfect test. Not so much for Virgil. I feel like Virgil's a little bit more advanced than that. I feel like Virgil should be fighting like a Stanionis, a Butayev, somebody like that. But I think that Conor Benn and Evanesian would be a great matchup and a very appropriate matchup. Jay Foreman said, yeah, Rivera is Dominican. Okay. I'd rather him than Jojo Diaz or something like that. So, yeah, I can see Ryan Garcia kind of, I don't know. How would Ryan Garcia versus Jojo Diaz play out? Would he be the first to stop Jojo, or would he more or less cruise to a decision? Because Jojo it's just hard to picture Jojo being fearful of the power, right? Like, we saw him kind of stymied and kind of stunted and stuff when Devin Haney was out boxing him. But I have yet to see, and we saw the same thing with Gary Russell Jr. against Joseph Jojo Diaz, where he was just too fast. Jojo Diaz was like playing catch up the whole fight. But with Ryan Garcia is not somebody who's just going to be too blistering fast to where you can't fight him. It's like, if you want to fight Ryan Garcia, he's there. You could find him. You know, you could go up to him and say hi and start throwing punches if you want to. That's kind of JoJo's style. So this might be the first time, if he was to fight Ryan, where it's like, this isn't a question of whether you could catch up to the guy. It's whether you want to catch up to the guy, right? So that's what and so at least we would get that interesting dynamic once we squint in a potential Ryan Garcia versus JoJo matchup. But Michael Rivera versus Ryan Garcia, that could be interesting. I tend to think Ryan Garcia is a little bit too quick. I think Ryan Garcia would catch him. But again, that would be probably in a different weight class, 140. So who knows how Ryan Garcia actually handles somebody with a 140 body, not somebody with a featherweight body like Javier Fortuna, who happens to say, okay, how much you going to pay me? Sure, I'll fight you at heavyweight if you want to, right? Yeah, exactly. EK said Conor Benn versus Virgil Ortiz Jr. Run it. I would love that. And you know what? That's a fight that could happen. That could happen. The only thing that makes me think that maybe it would be difficult to fight or difficult to make is maybe Conor Benn's like financial demands are too high, because again, he's a celebrity before he's a top elite accomplished fighter. But in terms of the politics and the promotional bodies and the platforms, this one could work out, because Eddie Hearn and Oscar do work together on some of those DAZN fights. It's a little bit rare, but it happens. And Conor Benn with Matchroom, Virgil Ortiz Jr. with Golden Boy, I would love to see that one. And I think that would also be an appropriate fight. I would favor Virgil Ortiz Jr., even though I have to say Conor Benn is impressing me more with every fight that he has. Virgil should fight Ugas, LTAMTC. Man, that would be a tough fight schedule if you're Ugas, huh? Your eyes like getting repaired. You just had a great fight with a difficult, tough fight with Errol Spence Jr. Gets stopped. That might have been the first time in Ugas' career that he's been stopped. I think it is. But yeah, you go from Errol Spence to Virgil Ortiz Jr. Do we want to do Ugas like that? That's almost like when Kell Brook went up to fight Triple G at 160. Then it's like, hey, I've got some bad news and some worse news. The bad news is, you lost to Triple G, your first loss in your career, broke your orbital bone. But the worst news is now you got to defend your IBF title back down at 147. So you got to lose all that weight and fight this young Errol Spence Jr. Have at it. I kind of feel like we'd be doing something similar with Ugas if the 35, 36-year-old gets in there with that. It's scary. I look at Virgil Ortiz as being one of the best. I really believe in his abilities and his jab. Like, a lot of people are. I forgot, were giving me some hypothetical matchups, and I was like, no. Like, it was some sort of a brawl-style fight. The way that the question was framed was like a brawl-style fight for Virgil Ortiz Jr., and I was thinking, like, no, Virgil's a boxer puncher. Like, this guy's jab, to me, is one of the best in the game. Like, I like Stanionis' jab as well in that same division. But yeah, Virgil Ortiz versus Ugas, not to say that he beats Ugas, but damn, that would be a tough back-to-back if you're Ugas. But I still like the matchup. I hope Ugas is well-rested, and still motivated. Well, you scale the mountain, you make it to the top. You beat Pacquiao, and then you fight Spence. I hope that the motivation is still there. I think it still is if I, believe his Instagram account. After LTAMTC says, after Crawford and Spence unify, they will move up. Ugas and Ortiz is a perfect fight. Yeah, so Spence and Crawford, yeah, that might be both of their last fight at 147, I think. So you guys really think that Crawford is going to go up? And I know he's been calling out Jermell Charlo at 154, and man, that would be interesting, right? He's a little long in the tooth, so if he's going to get it done, he's got to, not long in the tooth performance-wise, I'm just talking age here, right? Yeah. And I desperately hope that by the time they make Spence versus Crawford, that Crawford is like, it isn't past 35. I don't love him being 35 for that fight. But if he's 36, or you know what I mean, like, they might have waited a little bit too long for that one. Just the same way that I think they waited a little too long for Triple G versus Canelo 1. I would have much rather I would have loved to have seen Triple G at 33 fight Canelo versus like at 35 and then 36, I think. Yeah, there will be belts vacated for sure, right? Because Errol Spence is holding 3 and Crawford's holding 1. So, yeah, it's going to be a feeding frenzy at 147 whenever, if ever, they make that fight and that fight takes place and we have a clear winner. There will be belts released, I believe, and it's going to be a feeding frenzy in the same way that it was at 140 when Terrence Crawford dropped the titles. You had... we were talking about somebody recently who was fighting for one of those vacant belts. But shortly after the Crawford fight, you had the Super 6 or the WBSS where check 1 2 check 1 2. I think what that's telling me is I've got 10 battery life on my phone. Yeah, we'll be wrapping up in a second. But yeah, in the Terrence Crawford releasing all of the belts after being undisputed at 140, you had like Kirill Relic. And then Rancis Barthélemy, that was the name I was going for. Rancis Barthélemy was trying to win in another division because he had beaten Kirill Relic just before fighting a rematch with Relic for one of those 4 titles that Crawford dropped off. And Relic ended up beating Barthélemy in the rematch, and I bring up Barthélemy because he's about to fight Gary Antoine Russell on that Danny Garcia versus Jose Benavidez Jr. undercard, not this coming weekend, but next weekend. Gary Antoine Russell, remember, he just became the first to stop Victor Postal, brother of Gary Russell Jr., Gary Antoine Russell. I'm just going to start calling him Gary Antoine, right? Just to clarify between him and Gary Russell Jr. But Rancis Barthélemy was fighting Kirill Relic in that rematch for the vacant title. Relic beat him for that title, and then in the semifinals of that World Boxing Super Series, Regis Prograis beat Kirill Relic, and so that was the belt that Regis Prograis took in against Josh Taylor, who had 1 belt as well. So then they unified those 2. Then Taylor came out with both of those belts, then fought Jose Ramirez, who had beaten Maurice Hooker for one of those belts. I think Maurice Hooker fought Terry Flanagan, a former 135-pound belt holder, I believe, for the vacant 140-pound belt. So Hooker won that one, has one of the belts, fought Jose Ramirez, who had one of the belts. Jose Ramirez comes out with both of the belts, and then that's how we got the next unification at 140 between Josh Taylor and Jose Ramirez. So I think you're going to have the same Wild Wild West scenario. I hope we do, especially because PBC's got most of the guys. What Virgil Ortiz really needs to do, I mean, just to make those fights work out, is leave Golden Boy and go over to PBC. You know, look, and I don't say that to disparage Golden Boy. I love Golden Boy. I was a big Oscar fan too, even though I often pulled against him for different reasons. But there are certain weight classes and certain fighters in certain divisions that being with a certain promoter works out perfectly, splendidly. But like in the case of Jamal Charlo at 160, being on PBC is not paying off for him, right? So fighters have to be very cognizant of that. And in some ways, they have to take things into their own hands. They have to determine the fights that they want. And if they put pressure on their promoter to make that fight happen and the promoter doesn't get it done, they need to jump ship. I know sometimes they're tied in and contractually obligated for a few fights, so it's not like they could just jump whenever they want. But if they do have the leverage, they need to make it known the fights that they want made and go get it. Go to the promoter who can offer you what you want, right? So Virgil Ortiz, you're going to have to keep on making these weird McKinson, Mean Machine style fights until the circumstances present themselves to where either you could get a cross-promotional fight done, which, shoot, you better grab a belt, or 2, if you want to do some cross-promotional business with PBC. But we saw even in the case of Terrence Crawford, it still didn't work. So something's got to give for Virgil Ortiz to get in the fights that we want to see him in. But yeah, I hope that we get the Wild Wild West scenario in the wake of Spence versus Crawford. We're about to wrap it up in a second, guys. I don't want it to cut out unexpectedly on y'all. Like always, man, I enjoy doing this with you guys. LT, AMTC, thanks again. Yeah, it would be for a vacant belt. Jay Foreman said, I'm not complaining about Ben versus Eubank, but I would love to see Eubank versus Munguia. Oh, man. That's a good call, actually. Munguia, heavy-handed. People still see flaws in his game, even though I think he's getting to be better and better of a boxer with every fight. Even though those first couple rounds against, what was it, Jimmy Kelly a couple months ago, he was getting outboxed, right? I mean, he turned it around pretty quickly. But we kind of saw what at least the short-term blueprint is to outboxing him. But Chris Eubank Jr., another guy who gets out to a good lead, he looks like Roy Jones in the first couple rounds, and then his activity level just falls off of a cliff like it did against Liam Williams, and he usually looks much less impressive in the second half of fights. But it's just fitting that he's being trained by Roy Jones Jr., right? It's almost like, how do you teach somebody to fight like Roy Jones Jr.? Like what kind of, and we're going to talk about this in another video, but Roy Jones Jr., he sounds like he wants to be recognized as a heady fighter as much as a talented fighter. I hear him in a lot of these cross-talk discussions where people always cite his physical gifts and his natural ability, lightning speed, power punching, all of that, right? His reflexes, second to none. But then he'll say, no, it's mental. You know, I could have the gifts or whatever, but I was just as mental as I was physical, where it's like, okay, I'm not going to knock the mental side of your game, but man, you have some A+++ physical talent, man. Like, that cannot be discounted. So yeah, I don't know about Roy Jones Jr., the trainer. I know he's trained Jean Pascal as well as Chris Eubank Jr. But yeah, I like the suggestion. Eubank versus Munguia. That's a good one. Let's see. Yeah, Jay Foreman said, that's what I've always said. If a fighter really wants a fight to be made, ultimately he could put the pressure on the promoter to make it happen. Yeah, or jump ship, right? LTAMTC said Munguia would crush Eubank. Now, he might, but we haven't seen Eubank crush yet. So I would still love to just see it. I would love to see it. Yeah, he's only lost to Billy Joe Saunders and George Groves. But yeah, we're about to wrap it up in a second so it doesn't cut out unexpectedly. I just dropped the Jojo Gonzalez versus Isaac Dogboe preview this morning. On Thursday morning, I'm probably gonna drop the Danny Garcia versus Jose Benavidez Jr. one in a couple days. I also wanted to talk a little of news about Andy Cruz, not Ruiz, but Cruz, a highly esteemed Cuban fighter who has been suspended and removed from the Cuban Boxing Club because he was caught trying to defect from Cuba to the States to fight professionally here. It's a damn shame. Look up the name Andy Cruz and that recent news about him. Also, if you haven't, check out Adrian Broner's press conference. It happened today about his fight with Omar Figueroa. He was on with, I think, Brian Custer. He said, hey, I'm going to check in with you later, but F all this. And he ended up cutting the press conference short. Like, it was like a couple minute long press conference. And he gave his reasons why. He basically cussed out Al Heyman, cussed out like the promoters and stuff. Check out Adrian Broner's press conference that happened today that was meant to promote his fight against Omar Figueroa. Yeah, you too, LTAMTC. Take care. I'm going to see you on the next one, man. Yeah, hopefully next Tuesday. Yeah, I would love for you to join. Always love talking shop with you. Growth Through Calisthenics. Thanks for coming through. Jay Foreman, thank you for coming through. Benjamin Tucker, Stan Tucker, that's my cousin and my dad. Thank you for coming through. EK, thanks for coming through. Jose V, thanks for coming through. Brian Roach, I see you're in the house. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't see that before. Thank you for coming through. Who else we got? Ventru, yeah, thanks. Thank you as always, Ventru, for coming through. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Jay Foreman. Thank you. Gerardo Reyes, what's going on? If I didn't shout you out earlier, I'm sorry. Gerardo Reyes, thank you for coming through. Heck yeah, you're at work. Hopefully you got it like, with some earbuds or on mute or something, or in an environment where you can have some sort of elevated sound or something. So so you don't get caught up. Hot Fast with Robert Reese, thank you for coming through. Yeah, thank you, Gerardo. Heck yeah, thank you. Seth707, thanks as always. Growth through calisthenics. Stay tuned on the collab show with Hot Facts with Robert Reese. I'm probably going to be talking about Hot Facts with Robert Reese tomorrow morning. I don't know that it's going to be a weekly versus a monthly. I just don't know if I'm able to do a Wednesday or Thursday weekly right now. So I don't know for certain one way or another, but I'm thinking that might turn into a monthly, whereas if it is a monthly, I would give you the date well ahead of time. If it was a weekly, I would do like the 1 day notice or same day notice as I do this weekly. But again, if it turns out to be a monthly, I'm going to shout it out well ahead of time. So yeah, I'll be talking with him either later tonight or tomorrow. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed the first episode that we did. I just don't know if my schedule currently allows for doing another planned weekly like that. But we'll see. If not weekly, certainly want to do a monthly. But yeah, thank you all for coming through once again. And I look forward to chopping up with you guys next time. Again, Joet Gonzalez versus Isaac Dogboe takes place this Saturday. Other than that, it's a relatively light schedule. But yeah, I hope everybody's having a wonderful week. Stay safe out there. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in, y'all. Peace.